My name is Rachel Klein, and I'm currently a PhD candidate in the Department of American Studies and Ethnicity at the University of Southern California, and also the recipient of the 2024 to 2025 American Association of University Women Dissertation Fellowship. My research explores the intertwined histories of the U.S. carceral state, neoliberal capitalism, racial formation, and gender politics through the experiences of incarcerated women activists in California. My dissertation, Care in the Wake of Violence, Gender, Prisons, and the Movement Against Mass Incarceration in California, chronicles how the modern carceral state violently reorganized intimate life, beginning in the late 1970s, and the various strategies affected families used to contend with this crisis. I weave together archival analysis and oral history interviews with directly impacted people to tell a grassroots history of the mass incarceration of women in California. In a period marked by punitive governance, I traced the care work and activism among imprisoned women to document both how they confronted intensified state violence and shaped feminist organizing outside prison. Care in the Wake of Violence elucidates both the construction of a gendered carceral state and the emergence of a women's social movement inside California prisons at the turn of the 21st century. Drawing from the insights of Black feminism and queer theory, I theorize what I term insurgent kinship, the politics of mutual aid developed by women in prison to forge solidarity and challenge their confinement, and argue that such collective care was a platform from which radical activism emerged in California during the 1980s and 1990s. Interdisciplinary scholars have documented the broad political and economic changes that gave rise to carceral expansion in the late 20th century. My research relocates the center of the story from the legislature and courts to track the history of gendered punishment and resistance from within the contested terrain of women's prisons. It also augments our understanding of prison activism during the era of mass incarceration, highlighting the prevalence of opposition politics within an expanding penal sphere, and the pivotal role of incarcerated women in developing the contemporary prison abolition movement in California. To tell you a bit more about my methods and theoretical framework, I analyze class action lawsuits, legal correspondence, state legislative papers and hearings, historical newspapers and radio broadcasts, activist flyers and press releases, women's prison newsletters, and a range of personal writings and testimonies from incarcerated women. I also draw on 30 oral history interviews I conducted with formerly imprisoned women, their families, lawyers, and community organizers. And I propose the concept of insurgent kinship to describe the creative care practices of criminalized families confronting separation. I argue that these kinship practices are insurgent because they assert communal values rooted in collective care rather than punishment, interrupt the cultural mandates of individualism and scarcity stemming from neoliberal capitalism, and offer another way of living together. Insurgent kinship demonstrates that incarcerated women and their families have been robbed of care and have cultivated care networks that have filled and breached prison walls. My first chapter examines the onslaught of mass criminalization in California and the legal activism that developed in women's prisons as mothers endured family separation and the neglect of pregnancy care during the late 1970s and 1980s. Chapter 2 explores the creation of domestic violence support groups beginning in the late 1980s by women sentenced to life for fatally defending themselves against abusive partners and their subsequent organizing for joint clemency. My third chapter assesses the mobilization of mothers serving life sentences who lost the right to overnight conjugal visits with their children during the mid-1990s and their political struggles against both austerity politics and law and order governance. Chapter 4 addresses the activist campaigns incarcerated Black women waged against institutional medical abuse, which laid the groundwork for a women's prison movement by the late 1990s and shaped the emerging prison abolition movement of the same time. My fifth chapter traces the impact of mass incarceration on women of color on the outside, especially on older women, most often grandmothers who have taken over the childcare for imprisoned mothers. These women facilitate the contact between incarcerated mothers and their children and have been forced to absorb the reproductive and productive labor from the mass criminalization of poor mothers. I conclude by evaluating the 21st century campaign for prison closure. Overall, I demonstrate how the punitive turn in regional and national politics transformed domestic life. However, by widening the story of mass incarceration to include the activism inside California women's prisons, Care in the Wake of Violence expands the fields of gender studies, carceral history, and social movements. It broadens scholarly understandings of how people most vulnerable to racial and gendered state violence contested structural abandonment and captivity, and shows how collective care furnished a framework for political organizing inside prison. This offers a new perspective on how incarcerated women stitch together feminist principles of the personal and political during a time when the mainstream feminist movement was increasingly bound up with state punishment. Thank you.
My name is Sora Woo, and I'm a PhD candidate in Integrative Studies Department at University of California, San Diego. Today, I wanted to give a brief overview of my project entitled Korean American Woman, Loving Music in Between, which has been funded by the American Fellowship from AAUW. My research addresses a few questions. The overall question is, how do Korean American women musicians such as Toki Monsta, Yeji, and Park Hye-jin negotiate and express their racialized and gender identities in this cultural space between Korea and the United States? So this includes looking at how their musical expressions challenge or affirm traditional notions of racialized and gender identity. This includes looking at how they interact with stereotypes like the model minority myth, their hypersexualization of Asian women on US media, as well as gender expectations for women in both the music industry and in larger cultural narratives. And lastly, I explore the implications that these artists have for the broader feminist movement, as well as the larger Asian American social movements. My research is interdisciplinary in nature and engages with various theoretical frameworks from different disciplines. So the first of these include post-colonial studies, which explores the cultural interactions and power dynamics between various cultures and societies throughout history. A key concept from this from post-colonial studies that has been crucial for my research is that of the third space, which is broadly defined as a space of cultural hybridity where cultural elements mix and create a space for new identities, perspectives, and meanings to emerge. So in the context of my project, for instance, I argue that the musicians I look at operate within a cultural third space that transcends rigid state-bound national boundaries of both traditional Korean music or K-pop on one hand, as well as the boundaries around what should be mainstream US popular music. I also look additionally at the framework of phenomenology, which really investigates how lived experiences shape individual perceptions and actions within social contexts. A key concept from this framework that is useful for my research is that of an embodied experience. The idea of embodied experience is that kind of highlights that identity and meanings are shaped by both one's physical realities as well as one's social and interpersonal contexts. And in my project, this framework is useful for looking at how Korean American women musicians use their positionality between Korea and the US cultural norms to challenge restrictive gender expectations through their own embodied experiences and expressions, specifically for looking at how their personal negotiations and embodied experience come out through their music and through their creative works. Lastly, my research also engages in the theoretical framework of women of color feminism, and this framework is crucial for addressing the intersectionality of race, gender, and class and exploring the lived experiences of women of color. A key concept from this framework is that of a differential consciousness, this ability of individuals and persons to navigate and resist multiple forms of identity, multiple forms of empowerment against oppression while constructing their own, navigating their own personal and artistic identities. And all of these frameworks kind of interact with each other, challenging both ethnic specific expectations as well as gender specific expectations. And they all help in kind of highlighting how artists negotiate and push against various cultural boundaries around their race, as well as sonic boundaries around their music and creative works, according to what society says should be their art or how their music should sound according to their race or gender. So within these frameworks, I engage in various methods. Largely, I do a lot of digital ethnography, which includes looking at the Instagram post of these artists, the comments on their YouTube music videos, etc. I also conduct musical analysis, watching their music videos mostly on YouTube, analyzing their sounds, their movement, the production, aesthetics of their videos. I also analyze their lyrics, which are often bilingual in both Korean and English. And I also, in addition, attend the concerts of these artists live and gauge how these artists present themselves on stage, how they move, what kind of movements and sounds do they present for the audience in person. And at these concerts, I also interact with other fans in the audience to assess how these fans are responding to particular gestures or movement or sounds of these artists. Lastly, I conduct archival research, looking at digital collections of archived newspapers, photos, recordings, etc., of Asian American social movements from the 1960s, as well as the feminist movements, the women of color feminist movements from the same time. And all of these interdisciplinary methods are used to highlight and foreground the lived experiences of these women artists to the forefront. And they, in my opinion, render music as a site where we can explore how they navigate and mold their racialized and gender identities in these cultural and artistic spaces. So in this vein, my project has various aims and objectives. This includes, I guess, advocating for the cultural representations for Asian Americans in both popular musical practices, as well as in scholarship and academia. I also want to, I guess, intersect discussions of both Asian American social movements on one hand and women of color feminist movements on the other. And I wanted to intersect these two discourses because often these social movements are studied independently, as if they're two separate movements for two separate groups of people. But as in the case of my project for artists who are both Asian American and consider themselves to be women, these movements are intersected and they interrelate. They're not independent. They actually go together hand in hand when it comes to standing for the empowerment of individuals who are both Asian American and women. And so, yeah, in that vein, I also wanted to demonstrate the women of color feminist implications of my project, which is in contrast and stand in opposition to the more hegemonic and colorblind types of feminism or I guess, discussions of women's rights and movements that don't really take into account the factor of race, the factor of cultural difference and ethnicity when it comes to advocating for women. Lastly, I also wanted to interweave these legacies of historical activism of whether it's Asian American social movement from the late 1960s or women of color feminism into the more present day contemporary US popular music scene. And this is for many reasons. First, I wanted to link activism and the arts and show how they could actually mutually reinforce each other and work together and are rather interdependent on each other. I also wanted to, by interweaving this historical legacy into the present, I also wanted to assert the social significance of contemporary artists. That is, I don't believe that their implications are only isolated to the current times and the present, but rather that these artists are participating in the same story of empowerment, the same story of fighting for people's rights that has actually preceded them and has actually immersed in history, and it's just now being continued into the present. So by interweaving what seems like the past versus the present, I wanted to push back against very rigid or fixed expectations of race and gender by showing how these artists are actually, contrary to expectations, fluidly shaping their own individual identities, their own individual artistic practices, and shaping who they want to be, whether or not that aligns with societal expectations. And also by fluidly navigating their own racialized and gendered identities, I wanted to show how music can provide a space for pushing back against the fixity of prejudice, the rigid expectations around who they should or can be. And yeah, that is largely, in sum, the aims and the objectives of my project. And yeah, hopefully if all things go well, I'll complete my dissertation, the writing part of my dissertation by winter of 2025 and defend this project and graduate from my PhD program in spring of 2025. So thank you for your support that has funded this project and has made this possible. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Shannon Bae. I am a PhD candidate at the University of California, Irvine in the Department of Anthropology. And today I will be talking about my dissertation project titled Reconciling DNA, Making Kinnination Through Genetic Testing in South Korea, which is being supported by the AAUW's Dissertation Fellowship. And thank you so much for your support. So the first slide you'll see two photos there. The first slide on the left is a photo of an adoptee named Kara Boss. She was adopted from South Korea to a family in the United States. And that photo is her standing outside the South Korean courts on June 12th of 2020 after she won a landmark paternity suit based on a genetic testing match that she first matched with a half nephew through one of the popular direct-to-consumer testing kits, and then later traced through that match to her biological father. And then she filed a paternity suit in South Korean courts. The other photo on the right there is a Korean birth mother named Han Tae-soon, who was reunited through a DNA match, again through a direct-to-consumer database in the US, after searching for her missing daughter for 44 years. And she's also standing outside of the courts in South Korea there after she filed a suit suing both the South Korean government and the Korean adoption agency that sent her daughter for international adoption overseas at the age of 4. So we saw two cases there where people were both, they were reunited with family members through DNA matches and using the courts to sort of get recognition legally about those biological genetic matches. Now I'm going to talk about some of the ways that the South Korean state is using DNA data banking in order to try to reunite other kinds of families. So you'll see here this Find My Hero campaign. On the right, you see a campaign flyer for a campaign that the South Korean government has been running in order to try to convince South Korean citizens, to submit DNA to their database because they have been excavating remains in order to find the remains of South Korean soldiers who died during the Korean War. So far, they have gotten 40,000 genetic testing submissions. In comparison, 325 Camera, which organization is, they pass out free DNA kits to any adoptee or any Korean citizen or any ethnic Korean who's interested in trying to find a family member that has been lost to adoption from South Korea. And so far, in comparison to those 40,000 DNA submissions that the South Korean government has gotten for their Find My Hero campaign, 325 Camera has received 6,000 kits from adoptees and 400 kits from birth families, even though these kits are free. So you can see that the scale is working significantly different. And here you'll also see a different database that the South Korean government is running, which is for the separated families from North and South Korea that were separated by the Korean War. And so they have been DNA data banking in order to reunite separated families from North and South Korea since 2014. And so far they have received almost 28,000 DNA samples. And you can see they have a significant budget they've approved this year of 610 million Korean won. And this photo is actually the first year that they're administering testing overseas, committed a lot of time and energy and funding to different DNA databases. In addition to those two, you can see listed there, number one, the Korean War soldiers, number three, the North-South Korean separated families, or Isan Kajok. In addition to those two, there's also another one for Jeju uprising. And then the fourth one is for missing persons. So that is one that's an ongoing database that you can do at the police station. And this is actually the only one that adoptees, international Korean adoptees, can currently submit DNA to, but there are certain conditions on it. For example, they have to have no family information on their adoption records. And so in order to show that they were possibly missing. And there's also conditions on birth family members who, if they're able to submit, they have to have proof that they have a missing child. And in the past, it was only parents that were allowed to submit, parents that had a missing child report from way back in the day. But nowadays, just more recently, they have since opened that submission up to siblings as well. So what do these cases have in common? So DNA, as you can see, is being imagined, constructed, and deployed by multiple actors to make personal and public claims and produce personal and public knowledge of kinship, identity, and belonging. In the case of birth family search, DNA testing has the potential to expose social wounds on individual, familial, national, and transnational scales and raise significant social, legal, and moral questions. So my research questions there are a few that I've posted here, but the first is just on an individual and familial level. What is the relationship between these cultural constructions of gaps can be found between knowing and doing kinship? Even once people get the information from genetic testing that they're related, how does that actually translate to practice of kinship? What kinds of relations then are being produced through genetic information across individual, familial, national, and transnational scales? Are people actually creating relationships from this genetic information, whether that be as individuals from families, whether it be as being sort of connected to a more national identity, or transnational families, how they're blending that into their families overseas, and what's at stake in genetic-based claims of identity or membership. We saw that, when people are suing for recognition into their families, there are things that are at stake, such as citizenship or inheritance, right? What is the social, political, and legal potential of DNA? How is genetic testing being employed by state actors to reinforce particular narratives, and those being political in many cases? And how might DNA engender unintended outcomes or counter narratives? 13 months of primary research from September 2021 to October 2022, doing participant observation, assisting with birth family searches with GOAL, which does more traditional birth family searches, and 325 Camera, which does the more DNA focused birth family searches. And my last bullet there is a note about positionality. Myself, I am also a South Korean international adoptee. I was reunited with my mom, actually, though, 11 or 12 years ago, before genetic testing really became a thing. So I used the more traditional approaches of birth family search, which is to try to track down information using your adoption records, which are often falsified or have almost no information. So that was very difficult, or by using South Korean media, newspaper. Here are some primary research findings that I can share with you today. There is a significant gap in access between adoptees and their birth families to DNA testing. So although adoptees have just that one DNA database in South Korea that they can use, they have a plethora of other options outside of South Korea, and they have a greater access to it because all of the information is available in English, and there is sort of a greater understanding of DNA data banking in wider American culture. And then something else that I thought was really interesting, which I didn't expect, was that DNA has sort of decentralized the birth mother and birth family member or birth family search. So many adoptees are finding or explicitly searching for siblings and fathers, because DNA does not just link us to birth families in a linear sense. It links us to family members in a concentric sense. It sort of leads to the recognition of the value of family relationships beyond child and parent. So I've had a lot of sibling matches, half sibling. And then DNA forces us to confront this binary of right to know versus right to privacy, which has long stood in adoption information. So within adoption, when it comes to birth family search, there's always been this idea of the birth family's right to privacy versus the adoptee's right to know, to right to their personal information. But DNA really forces us to confront that, because who does genetic information really belong to? If your cousin submits DNA to a DNA database, it can connect you to someone else that is a closer genetic match, whether or not you ever submitted DNA to a DNA database. So it really forces us to confront this idea of right to privacy to our genetic information. And the use of DNA as evidence of illegal and unethical adoption practices. So there are, like the case of Han Tae-soon, DNA is being used to show how adoption, because it was a huge profit-making enterprise at the time in South Korea. And it's also showing us, because of that, it's asking us to consider who has the right to citizenship and who has the right to inheritance. And then it's also this sort of biogenetic rekindling. We are seeing people sort of rekindling, reestablishing relationships in reunion, and they're really framing it as this reclamation or reconciliation of social injustices, reproductive injustices. And so, I think when we think about biogenetic relationships, oftentimes that is seen as a very traditional or conservative understanding of family. But in this case, people are framing this reclaiming of those biogenetic relationships as a way of reconciling social injustices that happen. So that's what I'll go to for.
Hi, my name is Nefertiti Smith-Christman, and I am a PhD candidate at the University of California, Irvine. And thank you so much, AAUW in the California chapter, for allowing me to share and continue my research. Today, I'd like to talk to you about fish, specifically zebrafish, and let's get started. So here you see a very nice, clean, pristine body of water. It's inviting. It's something I'd like to be in, perhaps you'd like to be in. You can see pretty clearly throughout. And this seems like a pretty ideal environment. However, through human impacts like logging and dredging, This is what lots of bodies of water can look like. Throughout the water column, there's suspended sediments. So dust particles, dirt, all those things go into waterways. And well, what happens, especially to fish, they can't see very well. They're not able to react quickly to their surroundings, either the predator or prey. They have delayed larval development, which we know from past research, gill tissue damage, impaired respiratory ability. So these are all the things that we know about when fish are in suspended sediment, or exposed to suspended sediment within bodies of water. I'm really interested in what happens to the gut. So why investigate the gut? The gut is a really hidden, interesting organ. It's how we get our nutrients. So without the gut, without processing nutrients that we ingest, we can't grow. Fish can't grow. Fish can't reproduce offspring, and fish can't forage for more food to grow more. So the gut is a really important part of the way all animals, and in this case, zebrafish, live their life. So I have two hypotheses about what I think suspended sediment might do to the gut. The first hypothesis, I think it might be a diluent. So it might dilute the food that they're eating, thus they'll want to eat more. And as a result, they'll have a longer gut, increased surface area of their gut, elevated enzyme activities, and low cortisol. The second hypothesis, I suspect that it might be a perturbation. They might not like it, and thus they'll eat less, and shorter gut, lower surface area, more enzyme activities, and elevated cortisol. So imagine you're eating as you're eating spaghetti, let's say. And so here we have a lot of spaghetti, and we're like, I'm not getting enough nutrients. I need to eat more and more and more. However, on the other flip side, we have spaghetti, and you're eating spaghetti, and you're like, oh, this is hurting my gut. I gotta stop. And so that's the basis of both hypotheses and what I'm going to be testing. So I embarked on this experiment, and I exposed zebrafish to spent sediment. And of course, I had a control. So the control was just clear water, and the other treatment was spent sediment. And so I exposed these fish to either control or suspended sediment treatment for 4 weeks. And after those 4 weeks, I dissected these fish, and I went through a process to do particular assays, specifically enzyme assays. So I blended up their guts and processed them, and did a bunch of assays to see what their activity level was like in either treatment. In addition, I did an assay called an ELISA, which is an enzyme-linked immunoabsorbent assay, and that measures cortisol. So while my data is still being processed and analyzed, I'd like to show you really one interesting finding. So just after 4 weeks, this is what the control fish looked like, and this is what the suspended sediment fish looked like. Suspended sediment treatment fish had was a lot paler in color, and less vibrant than the control treatment fish. And so that's just a small bit of what I'm researching, and more to come. So of course, again, I'd like to say thank you to AAUW, the California chapter, the German lab, which is the lab I'm a part of, Tim and Sarah, undergraduates that helped me on this project, use the HBCU Fellowship, the Academic Pacific African American Scholarship Registry, and again, a big thank you to AAUW that has allowed me to continue my research. Thank you so much.
Hi, my name is Megan, and I'm currently an MS candidate in electrical engineering at UCLA. I would like to thank AAUW for funding my research on low-power tunable flux sources for free electron laser steering and focusing, with applications in advancing medical devices. What are free electron lasers? Free electron lasers are a type of laser that use electrons accelerated at the speed of light to generate high-power, intensely bright, coherent, short pulses of laser light. They can emit light and be tuned over the entire electromagnetic spectrum, as shown here in Figure 2. And their exponential growth in radiation stems from free electrons interacting with electromagnetic waves inside the laser. This differs from typical lasers because typical lasers use mediums like crystal and gas to stimulate emission. Why are free electron lasers so special? They're tunable over the entire electromagnetic spectrum, increasing their applications. They also have a high intensity output, which helps produce high resolution images. As you can see here in Figure 3, the brilliance of free electron lasers is higher than other radiation sources. They also have ultra short pulses that minimize effects and damages from light radiation and help capture atomic ultrafast phenomena. Some applications of free electron lasers include medical imaging on the X-ray and terahertz spectrums. Their high-intensity pulses can take single-shot images with extremely high resolution and avoid damages from repeated radiation exposure, because you don't have to keep taking multiple shots to get the same resolution. Other applications include medical device material processing. Free electron lasers can work on the nano and micro scale to help clean, pattern, and etch materials used in biosensors for electrical and biological materials with high precision. It can change chemical properties of materials and surfaces without high heat effects, process biocompatible surfaces for biosensors, and help image and characterize materials for future research. Free electron lasers can also help with diagnosis and treatment. They can be used for protein structure analysis and molecular imaging, advancing diagnostic tools and research and diagnosis science, with better understanding of some proteins that can be related to diseases like Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, or dementia. We can also better detect disease onset. Free electron lasers can also help with targeted drug delivery because certain drugs can activate from the specific tunable wavelengths of free electron lasers, and their high precision can help with localized radiotherapy while reducing damage to other parts of the patient's body. How is a free electron laser constructed? It starts with an electron gun, where it generates an electron beam. Then, a linear accelerator takes that beam to a high enough energy so that we can get the intensity that we desire. The high energy electron beam then enters the undulator or wiggler, which slows the electron beam and reduces its energy to produce photons. These photons are then interacted with an electromagnetic wave inside the wiggler or undulator, causing microbenching. This microbenching causes the light to be coherent and therefore the same frequency and the same wavelength and phase, making a laser. To break down the parts of a free electron laser a little more, a linear accelerator is often made with radio frequency cavities. These cavities accelerate at speeds that are not limited by curved paths because they're in a straight line. However, this means that they are very large, often kilometers in length. As you can see in this last one, these parts of the free electron laser are very, very large. Current research is being done to miniaturize them to the meter and millimeter scale. A millimeter scale would be about the size of a pen tip. Undulators and wigglers are used to slow incoming electron beams to output the radiation we desire. These are often also in the kilometer scale. We have done some research to lower them to the meter and centimeter scale. My research is focused on magnetic beam optics. These are used to steer and focus the beam with the accelerator and wiggler. Much research has already been conducted for the linear accelerators and undulators and wigglers. So to make free electron lasers more compact as a whole, we also need to conduct research in making the beam optics components smaller as well. The beam optics components are very important to prevent the beam from spreading to keep our high intensity output. Current sizes of beam optics include about meters in scale, but we are trying to lower it to the millimeter scale. Some magnetic beam optic devices include dipole magnets and quadrupole magnets. Dipole magnets help bend and define our trajectory. They can split electrons into multiple paths, and they can bunch our electrons from different wavelengths to be denser together in the beam. Quadrupole magnets help focus our beam. It focuses in one plane and defocuses in the other, as shown in Figure 9, to create an overall stronger focus with these beam focusing optics. Current magnetic beam optic device advancements include a MEMS electromagnetic quadrupoles, which utilizes electromagnets to create a high field gradient and field strength, and it keeps its very compact size. A Panofsky quadrupole utilizes rectangular magnets and current sheets, making easier fabrication while also being compact. However, its low field gradient and field strength is not as desirable. These are all great strides in researching quadrupoles, but to make it more low energy and to increase efficiency, we want to further our research. My research goals is to simulate and test a permanent magnet quadrupole with focus on miniaturization and energy efficiency. To remind everyone, permanent magnet quadrupoles are important because they help focus the beam into the intensity that we want to get the results that we want from the free electron laser. Permanent magnet quadrupoles are low energy, less power consuming, and have high field gradient and field strength. They can efficiently produce a small beam size. However, their downside is that there is no field strength tunability to adjust beam spot size and intensity. So, by adding piezoelectric and magnetoelastic materials, we can provide a tunability aspect without having to physically change the permanent magnet quadrupole for each beam difference. A piezoelectric material converts electrical energy to mechanical pressure, and magnetoelastic materials change magnetic properties when mechanical pressure is applied. This helps us keep the compact size of a quadrupole while consuming less energy and increasing efficiency. The impacts of my research would result in energy conservation because miniaturized free electron lasers will take less land and less energy, and advancements in medical devices. More compact free electron lasers will increase healthcare accessibility and equity by making the free electron lasers more affordable. It will increase distribution to resource poor areas, as currently there are only 8 X-ray free electron lasers in the world. Increasing distribution will help earlier disease detection and decrease racial and gender health disparities. It can also advance precision medicine by making personalized medicine more affordable and accessible, and increase imaging applications for research studies and diagnoses. Thank you.
Hello. My name is Layla Zbinden. My pronouns are they, them. I am a PhD candidate in the Department of American Studies and Ethnicity at the University of Southern California, and my dissertation is called Butterfly Affect, Arab Feminist Worldmaking in the Wake of Pain and Illness. Before I begin, I would like to thank the AAUW. Your support and existence just means a lot to a lot of minoritized women and researchers in higher education. So thank you for existing.
Butterfly Affect, Arab Feminist Worldmaking in the Wake of Pain and Illness. This is a project that really centers the experiences and the narratives of chronic pain, chronic illness, and disability in Arab women around the world, but primarily located in North American contexts. The women that I engage with are primarily Egyptian, Lebanese, and Palestinian. I ask a lot of questions, but three of them are firstly, how do Arab women and feminists talk about and experience pain in their bodies? What strategies of language and metaphor do Arab women and feminists deploy when articulating their pain or their narratives? And what do these narratives tell us about non-Western ways of understanding the body, the self, and our larger orientations towards chronic illness and disability? The goals of this project are twofold. On an external front, I hope to equip healthcare and medical practitioners with the context and language to engage with sick Arab women. So this means the cultural context, the historical contexts, the reasons why and how Arab women end up in the United States or end up in a doctor's office. I also center the narratives of Arab women and feminists in fields like narrative medicine, feminist pain studies, and disability studies. And I do this because even though these fields are equally invested in centering minoritized and marginalized communities, Arab women are still left out of that practice. So I am centering them within the folks who also like to center marginalized people. On a more communal front, this project gives the space for multiply marginalized Arab women and feminists to even talk about their pain. This space is given through interviews, through email exchanges, and really offers these women the chance to reflect on their own experiences in ways that they might not get the chance to elsewhere. I also offer a sense of ownership over one's experiences with disability and illness and the ruptures that these cause in a life. I think a lot of attention is given to the ways that war or migration or refugeehood rupture a life within third world and post-colonial contexts, but I am centering illness as a point of rupture within that larger discourse as well. I do this project through a multitude of methods. I utilize archival visual analysis. I look at photographs. I look at history. I look at writing. I do oral history interviews as well. I utilize literary analysis and a bit of creative auto theory or nonfiction writing to reflect the lives and experiences of myself and the women in my own family as well. The findings are as follows. That contrary to medical or even the feminist responses to medical language, Arab women and feminists articulate pain in very collective, very communal, and very intergenerational ways. Illnesses are part of larger family histories of migration and displacement. Cancer and seeking cancer treatment is a reason why some people migrate to the United States or migrate outside of the Arab world. Chronic illness and depression are reasons why people are forced to leave their homeland or are oftentimes caused by being forcibly removed from one's homeland. These women also articulate very clear connections between their individual pain and their individual illnesses with larger histories. One woman that I interviewed says that her depression is very clearly connected to her grandmother's depression, and her grandmother struggled with mental illness because she was raising her children in Lebanon during the Israeli occupation. She attributes her own depression to living in the United States as a queer Arab woman and recognizing that she is not reflected in broader discourse around freedom and liberation and self-determination. The last thing that I found is that healing or even ideas around health are very connected to community and homelands and are less individualized and less medicalized. So this really just means that health, or what it means to be healthy, or what it means to heal from an illness, from an Arab perspective or an Arab women's and feminist perspective, it's less about the individual herself and more connected to the health of the community, the health of their own homelands and their people back home. There are a few challenges to this project and then broader implications. The genocide in Gaza really shifted the women I was speaking to, their ability to continue doing interviews. I had to pause doing interviews after my first round because everyone became grief-stricken and truly enmeshed and at capacity with organizing and taking care of their own people in the wake of the genocide. Because of this, I switched my analysis to a lot of written public writing, poetry, and literature written by Arab women and feminists to offset the lack of access to interviews. And that's something that I hope to continue revisiting in the future. The larger implications for this project are that, the treatment of illnesses in Arab women can't be solely rooted in biomedical frameworks. So we need to understand that in order for an Arab woman, for example, to feel like she has a grip on or a handle of her depression, it's not going to be just about taking antidepressants, right? Practitioners need to understand that chronic depression in Arab women, for example, are very connected to national geopolitical contexts. A lot of the women that I spoke to, or a lot of the pieces that I analyzed, they really weren't trying to cure themselves, because to them, their ailments, their experiences, their disabilities were not just about them, right? They're about their people, their communities, their actual health of their land. So that is where I'm at.
Hello, everyone. I hope folks are doing well today. My name is Essence Lynn Wilson, and I will be discussing my dissertation. I understand the recording will probably be delivered in 2025, so I wanted to dress up in my sparklies in preparation for the new year. But yes, I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Southern California, and I like to go ahead and get started discussing my dissertation with you. So I would like to begin a little bit more about who I am. I was a Black girl that grew up in Los Angeles, and unfortunately, childhood access to mental health care was quite difficult for not only myself, but for family members as well. And we'll discuss this later on. So this is what led me to earn my bachelor's degree at Cal State Northridge, understanding that mental health landscape specific to Black populations or those of historically underserved background. And this is what led me to also get my master's degree in experimental psychology. And this is what leads up to my dissertation. Here to get my master's, I obtained my first I completed my first digital intervention that is still it's still working to this day at Cal State Northridge. And this triggered all the excitement in terms of research and developing intervention approaches. And this is what led into me obtaining my PhD at USC in communications. I cannot believe it. I am in my final year. In fact, I'm seeking tenure track roles, trying to essentially create a research track with my dissertation at the forefront behind it. In fact, I just got an interview at Cal State Fullerton. So my research goals are to test, disseminate, create digital interventions to address inequities within underserved communities using mixed method approaches. Because it takes itself at the digital level, it's also a way to contribute to reparative media initiatives. I want to diversify the media landscape and center historically silent voices. And because I want to be a tenure track professor, I want to provide a hands-on participatory research experience for students and relate that to the courses I'll teach for them overall. So let's just discuss a little background that leads to my dissertation. In fact, it's part of its literature review. And this was the concerning suicide completion rate by Black teens between 2009 and 2017. In fact, it was by 89% here, and rates still continue to increase compared to that of white peers post COVID-19. And this is according to the Pew Research Center. And depressive disorders predict this, unfortunately. And Black teens undergo a specific experience when it comes to depression. So being a teen is not the easiest process. Teens undergo cognitive, psychological, interpersonal changes that make them vulnerable to mental health complications. But specific to being a Black teen, they are more at risk of receiving racial discrimination and negative perceptions that increase their stressors, and of course, structural obstacles. The effects of slavery, redlining, segregation, and so forth have made it difficult for Black families to develop the wealth needed to get comprehensive care. And this leads up to the stressors or heightened stressors from the COVID-19 pandemic. These health and social risks are amplified as a result of this. And although we maybe live in a quote unquote post-COVID world, those effects still play a significant role. However, the biggest concern is that Black teens are not getting mental health services. There's a lot of culturally competent care targeted to them, regardless of insurance coverage, financial complications, and even proximity to those services. And research has found that stigma remains one of the largest roles in preventing Black teens in seeking help. And this is beyond Black teens, this is the Black community as a whole. In fact, only 1 in 4 Black individuals seek professional mental health care, requiring tailored outreach. So this blew me away. Definitely in need of services for them. And with my research in digital interventions, I wanted to seek strategies for that. And I found animation very effective in terms of improving digital intervention structures. In fact, I even conducted a meta-analysis where I collected experiments across 8 databases and analyzed all experiments that compared animated interventions versus non-animated interventions to see if animation has proven to be an effective way. And indeed, they were. So this is what led to my magnum opus, Creating Black Jasmine. This is a theoretically informed, participatory informed intervention targeted to Black youth. And currently in its post-production phase. It's beyond an intervention, it is also a media artifact. And this is a theory-driven, participatory animated intervention that aims to increase service-seeking behaviors among Black youth, with efforts to reduce stigma to depressive disorders, reduce stigma to professional service seeking, and increase their intention to seek mental health services. So to make sure it's effective, I combine theory with participatory methods. One of the most well-known theories, especially for teens, is the theory of planned behavior, where if you change their attitudes, their belief, and self-efficacy, that makes them more inclined to engage in pro-health behavior. Secondly, narrative persuasion, putting health information into a narrative, a story, makes viewers more persuaded. And this is what led to Black Jasmine's story, where we created a relatable character to improve attitudes to services, challenge stigma, navigating their health climb, and of course, overcoming some cost concerns. And speaking of the participatory method, which was one of my most pride moments in terms of centering the community, is what informs most of what Black Jasmine is. So what I did is I gathered formative data among Black teens through interviews to understand, what is your experience? What services do you need? What can be done? And this led to strategies. I facilitated and recruited Black youth for an advisory board meetings to discuss ways to strategies in making the intervention, and also recruited animators to create Black Jasmine using their professional experiences. And this is what led to the intervention's development. It is essentially an animated feature, an approach that can be disseminated across various social media artifacts, within health clinics, and so forth. And here I facilitated co-design sessions. These sessions included script writing, concept art, sound design, and of course, collaboration through all stages of these processes. And then our final stage is feasibility and acceptability, where we're determining feasibility and acceptability testing through mixed method approach and survey research, and also doing an experimental design, kind of going back to my history of my getting a master's in experimental psychology, in a post 3x2 pre-post test and survey design. So this is actually the phase that I'm currently in, but I wanted to show images of what we did. Our meetings were primarily online, as I had teens from across interstates within the US. Here are all the designs, and for the sake of time, I would love to show you the animatic, but I believe I will have the opportunity to show you in person in the Los Angeles chapter. So I'm currently in the last stage right now. In fact, I pretty much completed all data collection. Where right now I need to engage in data crunching, essentially, data screening, undergoing descriptive statistics, where I'm comparing the conditions in a pre-post timeline between the Black Jasmine, a non-animated equivalent, and a control group, and measuring their stigma and intention across time, and also employing some exploratory analysis, really emphasizing the quantitative components behind testing this intervention out. So this is the final stage I am doing right now in terms of completing this dissertation. All data has been collected. So what's next? Wrapping up the dissertation. In fact, I just had a meeting with my committee members and submitted pretty much all of my draft of my dissertation, besides the data analysis part that I'm going to do this week, and for them to review and make sure everything is clear and comes across effectively. Right. So alongside my dissertation is seeking tenure track positions and a grant for a full trial for this. I would like to assess this intervention and behavior outcomes and longitudinal outcomes. And with that tenure track role, I would love to make this project into a lab and studio, have undergraduate research and art-based teams, cross-departmental collaboration, emerging technologies, and it could be a public benefit intervention where it can intersect with other spaces such as political science, interpersonal and organizational communication. Overall, I am excited to take this Black Jasmine model for other communities and mental health services. So that concludes my presentation to you. I want to say thank you so much, AAUW, for your immense support. You don't know how amazing that support was in terms of getting this dissertation across. So I want you to know that it has been so effective in making sure this is aligned perfectly. The timeline has been wonderful and the collaboration has been fantastic. And of course, open to any questions, email, reaching out to me. I am open to it all and discussing this. All right. And just wanted to give a tagline to everybody who has basically formatted this project, contributed to it, and will continue to contribute to it as much as possible. All right. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate everything you've done and hope you have a wonderful beginning of your year. Thank you. Bye.